Hi everyone, this is Milagros from Thank You Plant Medicine. Today I bring to you this amazing video about psychedelics, religion and spirituality. This was part of our live panel of the Thank You Plant Medicine Day. You are going to hear some spiritual and religious leaders from different religions. We are going to hear their perspectives about plant medicine, psychedelics, spirituality and religion. It's going to be a great talk. To moderate this panel, we had Adriana Kurtzer. She is a New York-based lawyer, co-founder of Plant Medicine Law Group, Boutique Psychedelics, and cannabis law firm founded in 2020. She worked for the Obama administration, and she now leads Faithdelic, a community of Jews, Christians, and Muslims that are passionate about the potential role psychedelics can play in their own religion, and explore how psychedelics can benefit these existing religious traditions. So I really hope you enjoy the video.
Thank you so much for that introduction. As you heard, my name is Adriana Kurtzer, and I am thrilled to be here today moderating the panel for Thank You Plant Medicine entitled Spirituality, Religion, and Psychedelics. This is an opportunity to bring together four people to talk about, in many different ways, how religious traditions that have had long-standing relationships with plant medicine talk a little bit more about that relationship and those lineages, and then have other people who are in their own traditions exploring novel ways and innovative ways of including psychedelics in religious practice or ritual practice. So this really is an opportunity, not that we have two different camps, but we have almost like two different realities of traditions that have dealt with plant medicine. One that has the ability to share knowledge about a long-standing tradition, and another tradition, and another side that is asking many questions about how to bring these plant medicines into practice and their communities. So, without further ado, allow me to introduce our four guests today. To start with, we have Belinda. She is of Diné, Navajo, and Ashiwi, which is Pueblo of Zuni descent. She resides in Arizona. She is the wisdom carrier, healer, and founder of Kaalogi, LLC. Belinda holds degrees in health sciences, technology, and public health. In addition, she has participated in MAPS, MDMA People of Color Therapy Training Program, and is the author of many articles on shakruna.net. Next, we have Behike Sensei Kavan Simpson, who is an ordained minister, multidisciplinary artist, international two-spirit medicine man, a Shotokan karate black belt, founder of the Entheogen Integration Circle in New York City, and co-founder of the Light of Iris Afro-Taino Yukayeke with Cacique Antonio Cuevas. He is from a matrilineal lineage of Jamaican spiritual healers. As a Behike specifically, he is initiated through Dieta into the path of curanderismo, the ancient sacred healing plant medicine path of the Amazon rainforest and Andes of Peru, mainly ayahuasca and wachuma. As a psychedelic revolutionary and leader of change, he has worked with Shakruna, Horizons, and MAPS in that regard. Next up, we have Benny Summers, who is a candidate for ordination at the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College in Boston, as well as a community builder, prayer leader, and youth educator. He is a seasoned Jewish professional spanning nearly a decade of work across different areas of Jewish life and learning, and serves as one of the moderators of the Jewish Entheogenic Society online. His studies have focused on developing into a thought leader on the intersection between Jewish spiritual practice and expanded states of awareness. And he focuses on uncovering content and practices that make future therapeutic approaches more accessible to the broader Jewish community. Lastly, but not leastly, we have Joe Welker, who is a Master of Divinity candidate at Harvard Divinity School, and he received his bachelor's from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in religious studies. Joe has a background in podcasting and storytelling and is a member of the Presbyterian Church in the United States, where he is discerning a call to ordained ministry. His studies at Harvard include interreligious theology, exploring the future possibilities of psychedelic chaplaincy, and issues facing Indigenous peoples. So welcome everyone to this fabulous discussion, and thank you so much for agreeing to be on this panel. So I wanted to start off from a very macro perspective, asking Belinda and then Kavan a couple of questions. So Belinda, could you speak about your experience using plant medicines in your work and describe how they connect to your religious background and spiritual lineage?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Before I get started, Adriana, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement of the original people for which I reside currently. A land acknowledgement is really a recognition that shows respect for the original people. And I currently reside in the Phoenix metropolitan area, which is the unceded territory of the Otham and the Peeposh people, which are also known as the river people here in the Phoenix Valley. And so I want to thank them for their the opportunity to be here on their original territories. So I think that's something that we all should really recognize, wherever we live, we're on original lands of Indigenous people, and to show that respect, because to me in the future, that's really what we need to do, is have respect for one another. So with that, I'll answer your question. For me, my original teachings around medicine or plants, and for context or reference, I refer to psychedelic medicines as sacred plant medicines, because that is what I was taught as a young child, that plants are really here to heal us. And when I say us, I'm referring to humanity. That was what we were here for. The indigenous people of the world were actually given the responsibility to be the caretakers of all of the sacred plant medicines and everything that exists around us in the universe. And that ties into the piece on spirituality, which I think is where we're headed to in this in this time. And so for me, my psychedelic experiences actually began about, I would say, about 4 or 5 years ago. And I was called to use ayahuasca. And for me, I had some really profound experiences with ayahuasca. I've also had the opportunity in my Diné culture. We are also have are holders of the Native American Church as well, and so we also practice peyoteism, which are, I guess that's a religious term that is used, but we don't see it as that, and so we only speak in those terms for the context of helping people to relate to what that is about. And so I think that's one point. And then my other experience have also been with the use of MDMA and mushrooms. And so, each of these plants, I see them as different aspects of who we are. When I look at the psychedelic medicines of ayahuasca, she is really the grandmother. She is the queen, if you will, of all plants. The peyote is really, we call her Shamazet, which means mother medicine, which is really a real gentle spirit. And the mushrooms are really from the indigenous teachings of the people of Mexico. My understanding is that they're the medicine of the child. And so for somebody that's really going to be working on the inner child, that's really a medicine that is to be used in that context. And so, one of the things that my own research that I've done, The indigenous people, primarily of North and South America, Mexico, there's records going back as far as 1577, where indigenous people were actually using sacred plant medicines. In 1620, the Roman Catholic Church actually considered peyote, quote, an evil to be rooted out in the New World. And as a consequence, promulgated laws that forbid the religious use of peyote, which is remnants of that we still see today in the Americas. And for the Diné people, we had to really fight a legal battle in order to be able to use sacred peyote as a sacrament. It's not even a sacrament to me. Sacrament relates to a religious term. It's just a sacred medicine that is used for our healing. And so we really need to be mindful and educate ourselves about the context of that. And so I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thank you. If you see me taking notes, it's because I find it so interesting how even the vocabulary that someone like me uses to ask a question has to be thought through on so many different levels. So I've been taking notes as you've spoken on a couple of things, the difference between sacrament and sacred medicine, using the terms sacred plant medicine. And then this very interesting mention that you made of the term peyotism being used almost when, presenting to the quote outside community. So I'm going to think more after this call, and I think we all should, about how words, even among communities and between communities differ, and how inter-community language sometimes is different from from what conversations that are outside facing. So the next up is Kavan. And your bio connects you to a host of different traditions. I was wondering if you could share with us an overview of your work with plant medicine and its specific connections to spiritual or religious practices.
Okay. To answer that effectively, first I want to honor that I'm on Napi land before every ceremony, and just really respectfully honor that. My entry point into this work is from the perspective of a first-generation Jamaican immigrant. So it has been an effort of Sankofa, which means going back to get it in African spirituality. It has been an effort of visionary Sankofa at moments, looking for pieces of oneself or one's culture that aren't that don't exist in the world and have been removed or killed from the world, so to speak. So that was my entry point. How psychedelics has helped with reawakening my connection to my own genetic ancestry. Well, it scared the crap out of me. It scared the crap out of me, for one, and it made me see the responsibility and weight of what my mother went through when she was carrying me in her womb. It made me see the responsibility and weight of what a slave went through in the bottom of a ship. And inside of the normal demographic for an expensive ayahuasca or retreat ceremony, inside of that demographic, it is extremely difficult to unravel or purge the epigenetic traumas that has led to the disconnect of certain parts of plant medicine work. So having had those experiences in very not so safe spaces for someone like me, kind of quickened my awakening process, so to speak. So in Jamaica, our plant medicine, it's not just psychoactive. And there are things that we practice spiritually, connecting to our African orishas, that allow us access to the visionary plane without ingesting anything. So I enter this work from that point as well. doing a search online, looking for a powerful psychedelic, looking for DMT or something of the sort, and stumbling across 5-MeO-DMT and reading that it's in the yopo seeds. Yopo seeds are used by my Tainos, my Taino blood, Afro-Taino, African and Taino together. So it's not that things, in my personal experience, have been broken. I found that through use of these plant medicines, they reawaken your ancestral memories in such a way that they're like pieces have never been missing.
I love that. The idea that they reawaken ancestral memories. And I also am very glad that you brought up this idea of the setting of an experience, and the people that were around you, and this challenge that often presents itself. A lot of people ask me why I'm so passionate about the conversation about psychedelics, and in my case, Judaism, or just faith-specific contexts. And I always remember my first visit to a concentration camp in Germany, and I was in a group in which I was the only Jewish person. And the people that were around me were predominantly Eastern European young girls who had used this program that we signed up for to go shopping in Germany. And that was not a pleasant situation to be walking through my first experience of something as traumatic. And so many times when I talk about, the psychedelic future of religion, it's a future, even for me, what I want to encounter in a certain setting. So I really want us to hold on to this idea in this conversation about, the benefits of perhaps going through a challenging experience in a community for which that trauma has better language, and what Kavan just explained, which is what happens when there isn't that environment. The next two people can perhaps talk about this idea of a psychedelic future. Joe, first you, and then Benny. Can you share a description of what your current studies entail, and explain how your interests, specifically in psychedelics, dovetail and don't dovetail with the academic religious organizations that you're a part of right now?
Sure, and thanks for having me. And first, I want to acknowledge that I, in Somerville, Massachusetts, am on Mashpee Wampanoag land. And my context is that, just to buffer this a little bit, I'm a Christian again, thanks to my experiences with plant medicine after not being a Christian for a very long time. And so, growing up with that language of Christianity, and eventually getting disconnected from that through most of my 20s, but then having plant medicine as even a non-Christian context, being something that really allowed me to have this long process of healing my relationship with not only my parents, but my whole tradition and my ancestry to a certain extent, to where I really started reconnecting to the spiritual grammar that I grew up with, and really felt that to be a deeply heartfelt, soul-felt language that just started resonating with me. Kind of like Kavan said, not the exact same experience, I'm sure, but awakening some ancestral memories within me. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but I think there's something there for me. Because eventually I realized, fuck, I'm a Christian again. Like, I can't deny it at a certain point. So anyway, in the context of that, most of my studies here at Harvard they're not necessarily directly about plant medicine, but I'm constantly unpacking what those experiences have meant for me in the context of my faith journey, and how plant medicine might figure in the future, knowing that that's a fraught territory given the very awful, frankly, relationship Christianity has had with plant medicine and peoples that have held these lineages, these traditions, and all the awful history there. But I am finding that as far as my integration of these experiences, that my studies, getting into scripture, learning different forms of prayer and different types of community, that's been the biggest game changer for my integration work. Is reconnecting to these texts and words and having a new appreciation for them. Again, texts that can be pretty problematic on their face, but really feeling indebted to plant medicine for allowing me to begin to recontextualize, to build a new relationship with it. As far as like future facing goes, I'm also I'm looking at things like I think mentioned in the bio, psychedelic chaplaincy is a new emerging field, potential ways that religious clergy might be able to offer holding space for people who are undergoing these experiences in more clinical contexts. I've also had the chance to study issues in the study, had a course called Issues in the Study of Native American Religions, in which we got to study traditions like the Native American Church and various other indigenous groups, and some of the history around the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and things like that. And so that's as I've been talking and indicating, that's definitely a big part of this for me, is hopefully re-entering this work at this time in history with a new chance to build those relationships and hopefully heal those to a certain extent as much as we can.
Thank you, Joe. Yes, whenever the conversation turns to textual analysis, you can always toss the ball next to a rabbinical student.
That's right. A lot of text work. So what I feel like I want to say in this moment is that for me, having grown up through stages of Jewish education, starting from kindergarten all the way through high school, very deeply engaged in my undergraduate days, traveling to Israel, living there, working on the professional side in Jewish communal context, and seeing like a general lay of the land of what we in the North American part of the Jewish diaspora are contending with, what we're thinking about, what we're doing well, what we're missing. I had a lot of opportunities to sort of scope things out and gain a lot of perspectives from different vantage points. And what I am currently doing at Hebrew College is spending a lot of time outside of building my foundational skills of textual analysis, Hebrew decoding, grammar, dealing with the foundational text and the processes of how our sages have worked through such dense material over thousands of years. Outside of all that, I am turning my eye towards Jewish mysticism, and specifically applied to Jewish mysticism, saying, well, if we can think of, if I can invite us to think of mystical training as sort of a triangle between theory, praxis, and experience, in which we engage with the theoretical concepts which appear to undergird the experience, that we can then apply through regimented practice to bring the mystical, to bring the experience into our everyday consciousness. And what I observe is that currently we in the broader American Jewish community are doing a decent job with theory, a decent job with practice, and I'm using decent very liberally here. But when it comes to experience, we are very much lacking tools. Our tools that work best are immersive experiences like Jewish summer camps and trips to Israel. These seem to be the kinds of trips, if you will, which really solidify a person within their sense of Jewish continuity and personal identity, that has the longest lasting ramifications on their personal life and how they practice and how they live. But Jewish camps are very expensive. Trips to Israel are very expensive. Access to these immersive experiences come at a cost, and we don't necessarily do the best job of expanding that access. And so what I'm very curious about is thinking in terms of primary religious mystical experiences, which only necessarily, not necessarily, but which only potentially have to occur once or twice in a person's entire lifetime on this planet in order for certain downloads from our ancestors to really sink in so that we can move forward with that wisdom, feeling the touch of that chain and wanting to be a part of its continuation. Because without that primary experience, without that burning mystical core that's at the heart, we begin to teach the layers which protect it as if it is the fire itself. And it's a human thing, and living in diaspora as long as we have, even after the creation of the State of Israel, has allowed us to exist in many ways in marginal social spaces in which we've been interacting with other cultures and marginalized peoples who also are working hard every day with blood, sweat, and tears to maintain a connection to their ancestral wisdom, and not wanting to see that snuffed out. So I think part of what my learning right now is building skills, creating a sense of competency with, swimming in the waters of my tradition, with also an eye towards how do we make these potentially life-changing primary mystical experiences occasioned by psychedelics accessible and held within a sacred container of communal support and acceptance, that we can then integrate into a broader framework for how we're helping people make meaning in their lives.
That was fabulous. Joe, I love this idea that experiences with plant medicine made texts resonate differently and led you to an oh fuck moment. And Benny, there's something so important that really resonates with me, this idea of what you called immersive trips, right? And when we talk about immersive trips and equitable access, I think what we're really trying to talk about is what attaches people to their tradition in a different way, perhaps in a more passionate way, hopefully in a more wholehearted way. And I think that what's interesting about what you just talked about relates to a bigger phenomenon, which is so many Jews leaving the fold because they didn't feel like their tradition had anything spiritual to offer, any spiritual vocabulary, any spiritual transcendental experience. And fast forward, 25% of all teachers of Buddhism in the United States are Jews. So I think that there's something to be said about rediscovery and representation of knowledge that we might have in our own backyards. Belinda, I want to go back to you and speaking about this idea of interruption of plant knowledge or integration of plant knowledge in traditions. I was hoping you could share a bit more about the history of sacred plant medicines in your lineages, and if there were moments of interruption or rediscovery, if you could talk a little bit about those moments.
Sure. I think one of the things, when I think of religious or the word religious, I think of the more organized religions in my mind coming from my experience. And I think, from a historical perspective, what that brought along were the doctrine of discovery and the impacts of that for a lot of Native American people in this country. And when I say this country, I'm referring to the United States. And with that, a lot of the original teachings about medicines and culture and traditions and ritual were all put to a stop, As you all well know, is that a lot of these traditions are oral traditions, they're not written down. they go from one generation to another. And so if there's an interruption of that, there's a disconnect in that. With the doctrine of discovery, there also came the taking of ancestral lands. It gave justification for, the expansion of the United States to take our ancestral lands. And one of the things that's really fundamental that people need to understand is that from a Native American perspective, our essence of who we are as indigenous people are tied to the lands. It's tied to everything that we are, to the sacred mountains that are near us, to the plants, to the air, everything. And one of the things that really comes to mind as I'm listening to the other speakers speak is that there's always this tendency to look for the answers outside of ourselves, our physical beings, when all of the answers are within us. And the lineages that we all carry flow in our blood, just as, the sacred water and the oil and all of the natural resources that flow in Mother Earth. They're one and the same thing. I always look at the earth as very similar to our physical bodies. And so when you come from that context, it helps you understand the importance and the sacredness of these plant medicines. My own experiences were very mystical when when I took the psychedelic medicines or these sacred plant medicines. It was for a small portion, and I also had an opportunity to travel down to Peru and spend some time with the Shipibo people, and which was a very beautiful exchange. But it also took me it took me to a whole nother level of reminding me and a remembrance of who I was. And I think that's the thing that a lot of us are really trying to understand is not understand, but to understand of who we are within our own being. And one of the things I think that it really awakens us to our soul essence and our higher self of who we are. I like to do a lot of reading, and one of my favorite mystical teachers is Carolyn Myss, and in her one of her books, The Holy Language. And I think that's something that we're all searching for as well as we talk about these sacred plant medicines, is really finding the verbiage of how to word things and how to share these mystical experiences that we all share. But one of the things she shares in this book is she says the ego traps you and the soul rescues you. And I think that is so true when we go through these mystical experiences with these sacred plant medicines, that we all need to understand and really pay reverence to them. In my own community here in Arizona, one of the things that I find is that a lot of the young people will go through ceremony one weekend, they'll do it again and again, but they never really take the time to integrate the experiences that the medicine are trying to teach them. That is not what it's about. In our traditional and indigenous culture, you may only have one or two opportunities in your lifetime to have that mystical experience and really ingrain that in yourselves. And so I think those are things that we all need to experience. And to me, they're also missed opportunities to really understand this whole mystical experience that we are here to experience as human beings. So,
I love what you said, Belinda, the difference between understanding and innerstanding. That's fabulous, and I will definitely hold on to that. And also this focus that you had in a bit of your answer to the importance of language, and how I can hear it in all of our conversations that perhaps one of our desires to struggle with these topics is to find the right language that then applies most intimately or perhaps most directly to our heart, and just goes there in a way that resonates. And speaking of language and application of language and resonance, Kavan, in the descriptions of your work, there are descriptions of your training in places like Iquitos, and that your intention, there was a great bit in your LinkedIn about your intention being to bring these experiences back to marginalized communities. I was wondering if you have found yourself adapting elements of these practices that you learned in South America to the vocabulary and the backgrounds of the communities that you then work with in other places, in order to make things fit or stick or resonate more with those audiences.
Before I answer that, I just wanted to like hold up a picture of my Aunt Fed. And this made me look a little spooky, but she died many years ago in Jamaica, before my mom came here and opened her own church and so on. And everybody in Jamaica talk, so like Jamaica them come from. So you have to explain things like that to a Jamaican. But I'm in this in-between body, right? I get to move into different communities, and each time I do that, I have to shift a little bit. Or the intention that I have of allowing someone the opportunity to have that genetic reawakening, I miss that opportunity. So I've been shifting a little bit. When it's time to speak to my mom, I have to find the right language to speak to my mom about it, because colonization has meant that her practices are deeply Christian and only beginning to involve more of the African spirituality that is natural to our blood. Whereas my generation, because we grew up here and there, we have a little bit of an attitude where we can brush things off and find our own kind of way. And although it may seem sometimes wrong, that wrongness of the freedom, how it's perceived, is what is now allowing me the ability to re-enter into these communities and give back a piece of what they don't even know that they're missing. So if it means letting the ceremony person sing, "Wade in the water, children," when that's not the way the ayahuasca ceremony starts, then I just have to let it be. In my heart, wanting to hold the tradition of what I was taught in Peru, that's not how it starts. But I'm now in a different community trying to allow an opportunity to happen. So I have to be a little flexible. And in that flexibility, step by step, lead people towards honoring what was protected. So the short answer is yes.
It's so interesting that you bring up the power of music, right? Because there's something that happens to each of us when we listen to certain types of music that we could all agree, if we want to have a deeper ceremony and a deeper experience, man, that sound is like the fast highway to somewhere, right? Versus maybe enjoying another type of music of a different tradition and being able to aesthetically or just take it in, but it doesn't have that same highway or that same directness. And so I'm really glad that you brought up music, because it's just a different type of language, right? I always, coming from the art world and having spent so much time thinking about the arts and culture, a lot of time when I'm in conversations about psychedelics, I want to yell from the top of the mountain, well, what about the arts, right? What about music? What about smell? What about taste? That can all be a part of this conversation that we have about faith-specific or spirituality-informed psychedelic experiences, which I know so many of us are trying to explore. Benny, what does a Jewish psychedelic future look like in your opinion?
I'm of two minds about this. I have a chazon and a ratzon. A chazon is a vision and a ratzon is a desire. So and they don't necessarily totally overlap, but I'll share both what they're worth. So my chazon, my vision is that within my lifetime, we're going to see retreat center-like spaces, which will be staffed by both clinical professionals and Jewish professionals, which will be tasked and sort of oriented towards providing people with a safe, guided, non-appropriative as much as possible, you know, primary mystical experience through the application of certain types of psychedelic compounds for a variety of reasons: healing, growth, transformation, return to ancestral roots, making and then sort of generally just making our tradition, which has been ossified over the millennia out of a necessity to survive, to come alive again and to bloom anew, for people's personal contexts and experiences, and to do so in a way that is informed both by the wisdom of the traditions around the world, which have, you know, expended so much energy and tension and soul to preserve, while also trying to artfully and deftly weave in the wisdom and knowledge that our own sages and practitioners have sort of been able to record for us to now learn from in this time. So I see that is my chazon, is like there will be retreat centers, there will be books and resource guides and programs for education and harm reduction, all coming, you know, supported by primary Jewish institutions. I know it seems like such a far reality for those of us inside, but I do think that that's what it will be. And I'm hoping to just be at the vanguard, at the front, you know, ready to sit at the table with people like everyone at this panel to have these really complex but deeply important conversations. My ratzon, my desire, is a little bit different. My desire is that Judaism and that, you know, society in general sort of outgrows its sort of recreational complex around these things, in terms of seeing them either only as medicine or only as recreational, and that there is some kind of binary between these two forms of application. And my desire is to recognize that so much of what can be profoundly healing and connective about these experiences is the sense of playfulness and looseness and expansion that they bring about, which, unfortunately, my observation is the sort of post, you know, sort of late capitalist society that we're all existing in has very specific reasons when they will support playfulness and an approach that is light, and an approach that it expands and that includes and that brings, you know, equity of opportunity. I want to see more of that, and I want to see a Jewish psychedelic future which recognizes that the fun that we have at Jewish summer camps, you can have the same kind of fun at you know, a separate kind of place designed to hold the unbounded childlike wonder and joy that we can sort of experience when in these particular states. So that playfulness, that openness, that willingness to see life as an adventure and not a series of problems becomes a trait that we no longer need that medicine to remind ourselves. It lives within us and feels fused to our legacies and to our traditions and to our sages. And I think so they have some overlap, but they are a little bit different, and what will be will be. But I want to be a part of helping however I can in either realm.
Yeah, I could talk until the cows come home about observing the Sabbath and cannabis and how they go really well together. Really well together. We have a few minutes left. I want to give everybody an opportunity to kind of go in the same direction that Benny went, but with your own answers. So Joe, and then Kavan, and then Belinda can end this conversation. What is the psychedelic future that you wish for whatever community you define as your community? Just a few minutes each.
Sure. So I really there's so much what Benny said that I think certainly I feel I have some similar hopes and, dare I say, visions at times with some of those things. For me, it's really something I'm discerning greatly, and I want to say really humble in how I'm thinking about this, and it's something that changes a lot for me, because I want to be grounded. Ironically, even though it's plant medicine that brought me back to my Christianity, I kind of want to be grounded in coming out of my Christianity when I think about what's a proper relationship here. And so there's something that I think is really important about having, to me, about having regular worship and regular practices that are accessible to people who might have difficulty, or might not be possible for them to have experiences with plant medicine. But I think there are certainly opportunities for what I think would be, again, I mentioned chaplaincy and earlier and things like that, palliative care for the dying. But I also really do believe that retreats could play a model, or could play a role in the long run. And part of that's just because that was my experience, and that's the one I feel most confident and grounded in. And that, what got me back into my Christianity was not some kind of argument of like some logical, like, why I can prove God exists now thing. There's like a weird thing online where some like Christians arguing with people like, well, this is why God exists. Like, but that's so missing the point. And to me, these experiences have just made me feel so connected with God. It's really experiential, and helping, I think, rediscover for many people an experiential relationship with God. Perhaps helping others process their experiences with Christian language, if that's spiritual language that makes sense to them. I want to be clear, I'm not prescriptive to Christians about how they should be thinking about this, but what I can say is just, this is what worked for me in my faith journey. This is how I got here. And I'd like to give back what I've been given.
Thank you, Kavan.
The psychedelic future that I wish for is one where more people in our community understand that you can intend something on the psychedelic visionary plane that then manifests on this one. My dream for the psychedelic future is people that know that they can remote view and access these higher states of consciousness with or without psychedelics. And in so doing, really begin to integrate and understand our oneness.
Belinda, would you do us the honor of closing out our conversation, please?
Thank you. For me, I think one of the things that we all recognize is that we are in a big time of change. You hear a lot of indigenous people talk about the prophecies. And one of the prophecies that my community is trying to fulfill is we created a Church of the Eagle and the Condor, which are bringing in the reemergence and unification of people of the North and of the South of the Americas. And it teaches us about moving out of our mind and into our hearts. And with that, then we can start to evolve and go to that inner understanding of who we are as human beings, as spiritual people, as energetic bodies. The other thing I see in the future is women becoming playing a much bigger role in the leadership of these communities, such as the one that we've created. That was the way the original teachings were always taught, with the matriarchal societies where they were already in their hearts. And it's time for the men to come into their hearts and get out of their minds. An elder once told me that the longest journey that we will ever have as human beings is coming out of our mind and moving into our hearts. And that is only 18 inches away. One of the things that I also wanted to touch on was regard to Benny's comment earlier about in this day and age and in 2021, it's hard to believe that we're still fighting for religious freedom. And with regards to the use of sacred plant medicines. And as part of the Church of the Eagle and Condor, we're getting ready to start an initiative that really looks at seeking religious freedom around the use of ayahuasca in the United States and really stepping forward. And, hopefully there are others that will help to support that because I think it's time for humanity to heal. And so with that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was the kind of conversation that I live for. I joke that too bad I have to be a lawyer during the day because all I would want to do is host and enable conversations like these. I am just blown away by how everyone here obviously comes from such different language backgrounds and historical backgrounds, and yet we're all asking similar questions and trying to share knowledge. I hope that the four of you will stay in touch. I know I definitely will. And thank you to the people at Thank You Plant Medicine for inviting us, for giving me an opportunity to moderate. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing each of you again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I hope you really enjoyed this video. So don't forget to put like to the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And thank you, Plant Medicine.